After 3 years managing client accounts, my husband's father gave my position to his poker friend's daughter. I cleared out my office with eerie calm. "She'll love the clients," I said. When the biggest account called the next day, the new manager froze. "They're all pulling out," she gasped, staring at her screen as the conference room door clicked shut behind me, and I knew my world had just shifted forever. Kevin Sr. sat behind his mahogany desk like a king delivering judgment, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. My husband Kevin slouched in the corner chair, studying his shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. The air felt thick, suffocating, like breathing through wet cotton. "We're making some changes to the client management team," Kevin Sr. announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when discussing weekend golf plans. "Casual. Unimportant. Stephanie will be taking over your accounts starting Monday." Stephanie, Robert's 24-year-old daughter who'd graduated 6 months ago with a business degree and zero understanding of what it meant to hold someone's trust in your hands. I felt my face arrange itself into something resembling composure. 3 years. 3 years of arriving before anyone else, staying until the security guard made his final rounds. 3 years of memorizing client preferences, their children's names, their anniversary dates. Mrs. Henderson preferred her contracts printed on cream-colored paper because white reminded her of hospital forms. Mr. Chen's assistant always needed documents sent by Thursday for his weekend review ritual. These weren't just details, they were the threads that wove relationships together. "She's young and eager," Kevin Sr. continued, as if youth and eagerness could replace years of carefully cultivated trust. "Fresh perspective, you know? Sometimes we get too comfortable in our routines. Too comfortable. As if comfort was a weakness instead of the foundation that had built their most profitable client relationships." My husband finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for exactly 2 seconds before darting away again. In those brief moments I saw everything I needed to know. He'd known this was coming. Maybe for weeks. Maybe months. And he'd said nothing. "I understand," I heard myself say, though I understood nothing about how loyalty had become expendable overnight. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of transition timelines and handover procedures. Kevin Sr. mentioned a severance package, something about appreciating my contributions, words that floated around the room like smoke. I nodded at appropriate intervals, signed papers that felt foreign under my fingers, and wondered when I'd become a line item to be resolved. Walking back to my office felt like moving underwater. Colleagues avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens or coffee cups. Linda from reception gave me a sympathetic smile, but even she seemed afraid to get too close, as if whatever had happened to me might be contagious. My office, former office, looked smaller somehow. The family photos on my desk seemed to mock me now. There was Kevin and me at last year's company picnic, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something his father had said. There was our wedding photo, Kevin Sr. standing proudly beside us like we were his greatest investment. How quickly pride could turn to dismissal. I opened my desk drawers methodically like performing surgery. Personal items went into the cardboard box they'd thoughtfully provided. My favorite coffee mug, the small cactus plant Mrs. Henderson had given me after I'd helped her through a particularly difficult contract dispute. The stress ball shaped like a globe that Mr. Chen had brought back from his trip to Singapore. But it was the bottom drawer that held my real treasures. Behind the emergency chocolate bars and backup reading glasses sat my red leather folder. I'd bought it during my first week on the job, thinking it looked professional and important. Over 3 years, it had become something more precious than any corporate handbook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. Not the official client files that lived in the company database, but the human details that made business personal. Anniversary dates, children's achievements, favorite restaurants, vacation preferences, health concerns they'd mentioned in passing. The kind of information you couldn't find in any spreadsheet or formal report. Mrs. Henderson's husband preferred their meetings scheduled after 10 in the morning because his arthritis made early mornings difficult. Mr. Chen's daughter had just started college and he worried constantly about her adjusting to campus life. The Williams account always sent Christmas bonuses to their vendors because they remembered what it was like to struggle when they were starting out. These weren't just client notes. They were relationship maps, carefully drawn over countless conversations and shared moments. They represented the difference between managing accounts and nurturing connections. I slipped the folder into my purse instead of the cardboard box. Some things were too valuable to leave behind, too personal to hand over to someone who saw clients as numbers on a spreadsheet rather than people with stories and dreams and fears. Stephanie appeared in my doorway as I was taping up the box, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. She wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes all year, and her smile had the practiced brightness of someone who'd never had to earn anything she'd been given. "I'm so excited to work with your clients," she gushed, as if they were gifts being passed down rather than relationships built on years of trust and mutual respect. "I've already started reviewing their files. They seem like such interesting people." Interesting. As if they were characters in a book rather than real human beings who'd trusted me with their businesses, their hopes, their vulnerabilities. "They'll love working with you," I replied, and for the first time all day, I meant exactly what I said, though perhaps not in the way she expected. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I felt strangely calm. The red leather folder pressed against my hip through my purse. A quiet reminder that some things couldn't be transferred in a company memo or explained in a transition document. Some things had to be earned, one conversation at a time, one remembered detail at a time, one genuine moment of caring at a time. The elevator doors closed behind me and I realized I wasn't ending anything at all. I was just changing where the story would continue. The first phone call came Tuesday morning while I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee from my favorite mug. The one with the chip on the handle that Kevin kept saying I should throw away. "Is this Sarah?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, though she sounded uncertain, almost apologetic. "Yes, it's me. How are you, Mrs. Henderson?" "Well, dear, I just got off the phone with your replacement and I have to ask, is her name really Stephanie or am I losing my hearing? She kept calling me Mrs. Hendersmith." I nearly choked on my coffee. Henderson. A name I'd said hundreds of times over 3 years. A name that belonged to a woman who'd trusted me with her late husband's business legacy, who'd cried in my office when the market crash threatened everything she'd worked to preserve. "Her name is Stephanie," I confirmed, not trusting myself to say more. "Oh good, I thought I was going mad." She seemed nice enough, though she did ask me to spell my name for her records. I found that a bit odd, considering I'd been managing her account for 3 years. Considering her name was printed on every document, every contract, every piece of correspondence that had crossed Stephanie's desk during the transition. "She's still getting familiar with everything," I said, the words tasting like sawdust. Of course. These things take time." "Well, I just wanted to say hello. I hope you're enjoying your," what did she call it? "Your sabbatical?" Sabbatical. As if I'd chosen to leave, as if this were some planned adventure rather than corporate exile. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, wondering how many other calls I'd be getting. The answer came sooner than expected. By Thursday, Linda from reception had texted me 3 times with updates that felt like watching a slow-motion car accident. She sent the quarterly reports to the wrong clients. The first message read, "Spelled Mr. Williams' company name wrong in the subject line." Twice came the second. The third arrived Friday afternoon. She forgot to attach the Morrison proposal. They called asking if we were taking them seriously. But it was the group email that really did it. Linda forwarded it to me with a single crying laughing emoji. The subject line read, "Happy birthday, Michael Chen." Except it was spelled Michael, and the email had been sent to all 37 clients on the main list. Mr. Chen, whose name I'd written correctly on birthday cards for 3 consecutive years, whose daughter Jennifer I'd asked about after every major exam, whose preference for green tea over coffee I'd noted after our very first meeting, had received a mass birthday greeting with his name misspelled. I closed my laptop and walked to my kitchen, pulling out ingredients I'd bought earlier that week. Flour, butter, vanilla extract, chocolate chips. My grandmother's recipe, the one I'd tweaked over the years to perfection. The same cookies I'd been baking for my top clients every Christmas, every birthday, every small celebration that mattered to them. While the first batch baked, I wrote cards by hand. Real cards, not the corporate branded ones Kevin Sr. insisted on. Simple cream-colored paper that felt substantial between my fingers. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," I began, my pen flowing across the paper like water finding its path. "I wanted to thank you for the trust you placed in me over the past 3 years. Your strength and wisdom have been an inspiration." Each card was different, personal, specific. I mentioned Mr. Chen's daughter's recent acceptance to medical school. I asked about Mr. Williams' new grandson. I referenced Mrs. Morrison's upcoming anniversary trip to Ireland, the one she'd been planning during our last meeting. The cookies came out golden brown, filling my house with the kind of warmth that couldn't be manufactured or delegated. I packaged them in simple white boxes tied with ribbon. No company logos, no corporate branding. Just treats from someone who remembered what they liked. That evening, Kevin came home smelling like his father's office. Expensive cologne masking the scent of old leather and disappointment. He found me at the kitchen table addressing the last envelope. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Thank you cards. And cookies." "For who?" "People who've been kind to me." He frowned, the way he did when trying to solve a problem that didn't have a clear business solution. "Sarah, you know you can't contact the clients directly. Dad made that clear during the transition." "I'm not contacting clients," I said, sealing the envelope with deliberate care. "I'm thanking friends." Over dinner, he defended Stephanie with the enthusiasm of someone trying to convince himself. "She's learning," he said, cutting his chicken with unnecessary precision. "Everyone makes mistakes in the beginning." I nodded and served dessert. Apple pie made from Mrs. Henderson's recipe, the one she'd shared during a particularly difficult negotiation when we'd worked through lunch. Of course they do. She's eager to succeed. Dad says she has fresh ideas about social media marketing and client engagement strategies. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, though I wondered what social media strategy could replace 3 years of remembered birthdays and handwritten notes. My phone buzzed during dessert. A text from Mr. Chen. "Sarah, hope you're well. Just wanted to say thank you for always remembering the details that mattered. Miss our conversations." I showed Kevin the message. "That's nice," he said, but his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "You should probably keep those interactions brief. We don't want any confusion about boundaries." Boundaries. As if caring about people came with territorial limits. As if relationships could be copyrighted and transferred like office equipment. Later that evening, alone in my study, I opened my laptop and found my contact list. Not the corporate database that belonged to the company, but my personal address book. The one filled with details I'd collected through genuine conversations and shared moments. Mrs. Henderson's home address, where she preferred to receive personal correspondence. Mr. Chen's daughter's college dorm, where care packages were always welcome. The Williams family's lake house, where they spent summers and appreciated hearing from people who remembered their stories. Some gifts couldn't be delegated or learned from training manuals. Some connections couldn't be transferred through corporate memos or explained in PowerPoint presentations. As I prepared the packages for mailing, I realized that Stephanie could have the office, the title, even the client database. But she couldn't have the relationships. Those belonged to the people who had built them, one remembered detail at a time. The girl who couldn't read a room was about to discover that rooms full of people who felt forgotten had very long memories. The post office became my second home that week. I stood in line every morning at 9:30, arms full of carefully wrapped packages that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or profit margins and everything to do with the small moments that make life meaningful. Mrs. Chen's strawberry jam went out first. Not the store-bought kind, but the recipe I'd learned from my mother-in-law before she passed. The one that required standing over a hot stove for 2 hours, stirring constantly to prevent burning. I'd remembered Mrs. Chen mentioning how much she missed her grandmother's homemade preserves during one of our coffee meetings last spring. The label I handwrote simply said, "Made with love," in my careful script. The baby blanket took 3 weeks to finish. Soft yellow yarn because Mr. Williams hadn't wanted to know the gender beforehand. "We want to be surprised," his wife had told me during our last phone call. I'd started knitting the night I cleaned out my desk, each stitch a meditation, each row a prayer for new beginnings. The pattern was simple but elegant, something that would last through multiple babies and eventually become a family heirloom. For Mrs. Morrison, I pressed flowers from my garden between sheets of wax paper, creating bookmarks from the roses and lavender that reminded me of the Irish countryside she'd described so vividly. She'd shown me photos of the cottage where she and her late husband had honeymooned 40 years ago, the place she planned to revisit for their anniversary. "The roses there smell like heaven," she'd said, her eyes distant with memory. Each package went out without fanfare, without business cards or promotional materials. Just my personal return address in the corner, written in the same careful handwriting I'd used for their birthday cards and thank you notes over the years. The responses started trickling in by Thursday. Sarah, the jam is absolutely perfect, Mrs. Chin wrote. It tastes exactly like my grandmother's recipe. How did you know? I've been searching for that flavor for 20 years. Mr. Williams called my personal phone, his voice thick with emotion. The blanket is beautiful. Margaret cried when she opened it. She said only someone who truly cared would remember such details. Are you still available for consulting work? I deflected gently the way I'd learned to do. I'm taking some time to focus on family right now, but thank you for asking. How is Margaret feeling? Is the morning sickness getting better? Much better, thanks to your recipe for ginger tea. She still has the card you sent with the instructions. Meanwhile, Linda's updates from the office painted a different picture entirely. She'd taken to sending me screenshots of Stephanie's social media posts, each one more tone-deaf than the last. Crushing it in client relations. #bosslife, #neversettle. Read one, posted alongside a perfectly staged photo of Stephanie at her desk, laptop open to what looked suspiciously like a Pinterest page rather than client files. Coffee meeting with Mr. Williams. Love connecting with our amazing clients. #networking, #success. Came another, though Linda's follow-up text revealed the truth. She spent the entire meeting trying to pitch him social media services for his manufacturing company. He makes industrial equipment, Sarah. For factories. She kept saying, we need to make your brand more Instagram-worthy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen experimenting with a new scone recipe for Mrs. Henderson. She'd mentioned loving the ones from a bakery in Scotland during our last conversation, when my phone buzzed with a message from Linda that made me pause mid-stir. Emergency. She's locked in the bathroom crying. Something about the Morrison account. Kevin Sr. is pacing his office. Can you call me? Instead of calling, I drove to the office. Not to interfere, not to gloat, but because Linda sounded genuinely worried, and despite everything I still cared about the people I'd worked with for 3 years. I found Linda in the break room, stirring her coffee with unnecessary vigor. She got an email from Mrs. Morrison's assistant, Linda whispered, even though we were alone. Apparently, Stephanie sent them a proposal for modernizing their brand identity, and suggested they needed a younger demographic approach. Mrs. Morrison is 73, Sarah. Her entire client base is retired professionals who value tradition and stability. Oh no. It gets worse. The assistant replied asking if this was some kind of joke, considering Mrs. Morrison's business specializes in estate planning for seniors. Stephanie panicked and sent 3 follow-up emails trying to explain, each one making it worse. The final one had a typo in Mrs. Morrison's company name. Through the break room window I could see Kevin Sr.'s office. He stood behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of overripe tomatoes. His free hand gestured wildly, the way it did when he was trying to salvage a situation that had already spiraled beyond recovery. Mrs. Morrison's assistant called to speak with you specifically, Linda continued. When they were told you no longer worked here, they asked for your personal contact information. Stephanie overheard and, well, that's when the waterworks started. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Morrison's number. Not the business line, but her personal cell, the one she'd given me after her husband's funeral last year, when she'd needed someone to talk through the complicated emotions of taking over a business that had been built for two. Mrs. Morrison? It's Sarah. I heard there might have been some confusion about your account, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. Sarah dear, thank goodness. I was hoping you might call. I received the most peculiar email today suggesting I needed to attract 20-somethings to my estate planning practice. I thought perhaps it was some sort of mix-up. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. The new account manager is still learning about your business model. Well, I hope she learns quickly. I've been with this firm for 8 years because of you, dear. Your replacement seems lovely, but she suggested I start a TikTok account to engage with millennials about death planning. I'm afraid I don't even know what TikTok is. After hanging up, I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching employees come and go through the glass doors I'd walked through every morning for 3 years. Some waved when they saw me. Others looked away quickly, as if acknowledging my presence might somehow implicate them in whatever corporate drama was unfolding inside. My phone buzzed with another text from Linda. She's out of the bathroom but won't stop asking how you made the clients actually like you. Kevin Sr. wants to know if you'd consider coming back as a consultant. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I drove home and finished making Mrs. Henderson's scones, humming softly to myself as I worked. The afternoon light streamed through my kitchen window, warming the flour-dusted countertop where packages waited to be mailed, each one a small act of rebellion against the idea that relationships were transferable assets rather than gardens that required years of patient tending. The scones were cooling on wire racks when Kevin came home that Friday, his shoulders carrying the weight of 3 weeks' worth of disasters. He dropped his briefcase by the door with a thud that seemed to echo through our suddenly too quiet house. The Patterson Group terminated their contract today, he said without preamble, loosening his tie with jerky movements. 8 years with the firm. Gone. I continued transferring scones to a storage container, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt building somewhere deep in my chest. The Patterson Group. I'd negotiated their first major deal, celebrated their expansion into 3 new markets, sent flowers when Mr. Patterson's wife had her cancer scare. What reason did they give? Kevin opened the refrigerator and stared inside as if the answers might be hiding behind the milk cartons. They said their new account manager seemed unfamiliar with their business model, and they needed someone who could anticipate their needs rather than react to them. Anticipate their needs. Like knowing that Mr. Patterson always reviewed contracts on Sunday afternoons, so Friday delivery was essential. Like remembering that his assistant preferred phone calls to emails because she was dyslexic and processed information better when she could hear it. Like understanding that their biggest client presentations always happened in January, so December was crucial preparation time. And the Henderson manufacturing account? Kevin's silence answered before his words did. Thursday. Same story. They said Stephanie was very enthusiastic but didn't seem to understand their industry. Mrs. Henderson, who'd trusted me with her late husband's legacy, who'd shared stories about building the business from their kitchen table, who'd cried in my office when the recession hit and we'd worked together to restructure their entire operation, who'd always said she stayed with the firm because she felt like family there. The landline rang at 11:30 that night, its shrill tone cutting through the darkness of our bedroom. Kevin fumbled for it, his voice thick with sleep and dread. Hello. I could hear Kevin Sr.'s voice through the receiver, pitched higher than I'd ever heard it, words tumbling over each other in rapid-fire panic. Kevin sat up, running his free hand through his hair. Slow down, Dad. What happened? More frantic talking. Kevin's face grew paler with each passing second. Yes, she's here. Hold on. He turned to me, the phone extended like an offering or maybe a lifeline. He wants to talk to you. I took the phone, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Hello, Kevin. Sarah, thank God. Look, I know this is awkward, but I need to ask, do you know what's happening with our clients? Because I'm getting calls at home and frankly, I'm at a loss. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This was the same man who dismissed me 3 weeks ago with the casual indifference of someone discarding outdated office furniture. Now he sounded genuinely frightened. I've heard some people are unhappy, I said carefully. What exactly are you hearing? The Morrison account called my personal line tonight. Said they'd tried reaching their account manager for 3 days with no response. When they finally got through, she tried to schedule them for a brand strategy session next month. Sarah, they're estate planners. They don't need brand strategy. They need someone who understands probate law and grief counseling. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. The Williams Group is asking for their files to be transferred. The Chin account wants to explore other options. These are people who've been with us for years, Sarah. What am I missing? How could I explain that relationships weren't built on org charts and mission statements? That trust couldn't be downloaded from a client database or learned from a company handbook? Kevin, these people don't want a vendor. They want a partner. Someone who remembers that Mr. Williams' son is getting married in the spring and that affects their tax planning timeline. Someone who knows Mrs. Morrison still lights a candle every month on the anniversary of her husband's death and might need extra support during those calls. But the files have all that information. Files have facts. They don't have feelings. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was weeding my garden when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Robert stood at my front gate, his usually perfect posture slightly stooped, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Sarah? Could we talk? I invited him in, offered coffee, settled him at my kitchen table like any other guest. but his hands shook slightly as he lifted the mug, and his eyes couldn't seem to meet mine directly. "She's trying so hard," he began without preamble. "Stephanie. She studies those client files every night until her eyes water. She's made spreadsheets, flowcharts, even bought books about relationship management." I nodded, genuinely sorry for the girl who was drowning in a job that had looked so simple from the outside. "But it's not working, is it?" Robert's voice cracked slightly. "The clients, they don't trust her. And I don't understand why. She's smart, educated, eager." "Robert, tell me about the first time you fell in love." He blinked, clearly thrown by the change in direction. What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me." "Well, I met Patricia at a coffee shop. She was reading Hemingway and had this tiny frown of concentration. I kept going back every day for 2 weeks just to see that frown again." "Did you study relationship manuals to win her over?" "Of course not, we talked. About books, about life." I remembered what she said, what made her laugh. "Exactly. You can't spreadsheet your way into someone's heart, Robert. And that's what client relationships really are. Professional love stories built on 1,000 small moments of genuine caring." He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee as if it held answers he wasn't ready to face. "She's my daughter, Sarah. My only child. When Kevin Sr. offered her this position, I thought it was perfect. A chance to prove herself, to build something meaningful. She will build something meaningful, Robert. Just maybe not this." That Sunday, while Kevin was at the golf course, a delivery van pulled up to our house. The driver handed me a beautiful arrangement of pink tulips. My favorite, though I'd never mentioned that preference in any office setting. The card was simple cream-colored paper, the kind I'd always chosen for my own correspondence. "Thank you for always remembering us. With gratitude, the Morrison family." I buried my face in the tulips, breathing in their subtle fragrance, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled without reservation. Some gifts couldn't be earned through training seminars or motivational quotes. Some connections were built on the sacred act of truly seeing another person and remembering what you found there. The phone remained silent that afternoon, but somehow I felt more connected than I had in years. The tulips were still fresh in their vase when Kevin announced we were expected at his father's house for Sunday dinner. "Family tradition," he said, though his voice carried the enthusiasm of someone scheduling a root canal. I spent Saturday afternoon making Mrs. Chen's apple pear pie, the recipe she'd shared with me during a particularly difficult contract negotiation 2 years ago. "My grandmother's secret," she'd whispered conspiratorially, "is the cardamom. Just a pinch. It makes people remember the taste long after they've forgotten the meal." The kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and nutmeg as I rolled out the lattice top, each strip carefully woven like the relationships I'd spent years building. Kevin watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to make anything," he said. "Mom always orders from that bakery downtown." "I wanted to. Sarah." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe we should talk about how tonight might go. Stephanie will be there and things have been tense at the office." Tense. Such a polite word for the complete collapse of professional relationships that had taken years to build. Kevin Sr.'s house looked exactly the same as always. Manicured lawn, pristine walkway, everything designed to project success and stability. The irony wasn't lost on me as we walked up the steps to a dinner that promised to be anything but stable. Kevin's mother, Patricia, greeted us with her usual warm embrace, though her eyes held a wariness I'd never seen before. "Sarah, dear, how are you holding up?" Holding up. Another careful phrase that acknowledged something had broken without actually naming it. The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind reserved for important occasions or difficult conversations. Kevin Sr. stood at the head of the table, his smile too bright, his voice too loud as he welcomed us with theatrical enthusiasm. "There's my favorite daughter-in-law." He pulled out my chair with exaggerated courtesy, as if good manners could smooth over the fact that he'd discarded me like outdated office equipment 3 weeks ago. Stephanie arrived 20 minutes late, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. She'd clearly been crying recently, though she'd attempted to cover the evidence with makeup that couldn't quite hide the puffiness around her eyes. "Sorry I'm late," she mumbled, sliding into her seat without making eye contact with anyone. "Traffic was terrible." There was no traffic. I'd driven the same route 30 minutes earlier, and the roads were empty except for the usual Sunday afternoon dog walkers and cyclists. Kevin Sr. raised his wine glass with the flourish of someone determined to control the narrative. "To new beginnings," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the formal dining room. "To fresh perspectives and exciting opportunities." I lifted my glass politely, though the wine tasted like vinegar against the tension that filled the room like smoke. Stephanie stared at her plate, pushing roasted vegetables around without actually eating anything. The conversation limped along through safe topics: weather, sports, Kevin's mother's book club, until dessert arrived. I'd cut generous slices of the pie, each piece perfectly golden with steam rising from the flaky crust. The cardamom's subtle fragrance mixed with the sweet apple filling, creating something that felt like comfort made edible. Everyone took a bite except Stephanie, who sat with her fork poised over the plate as if the pie might contain poison. "This is incredible," Patricia said, closing her eyes to savor the flavor. "Where did you get the recipe?" "A friend shared it with me," I replied simply. "What kind of friend?" The question came from Kevin Sr., though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Someone who understood the value of sharing something meaningful." Kevin cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the suddenly quiet room. "Actually, we've been discussing bringing in additional support for the client services department. Someone to help Stephanie manage the workload." "Help?" Such a diplomatic way of saying she was drowning. "That sounds practical," I said, cutting another small bite of pie. "You had someone who could have helped train her properly." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Stephanie's fork clattered against her plate, the sound making everyone jump. "That's rich coming from you," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "You act like you're so innocent, but we all know what you're doing." "Stephanie," Robert warned from across the table, but she was beyond caring about diplomatic boundaries. "You're sabotaging me." The accusation exploded from her like a burst dam. "Calling the clients, sending them gifts, making them think they can't trust me. It's not fair." I set down my fork carefully, meeting her tear-filled eyes with steady calm. "I haven't called any clients about business, Stephanie. But you're staying in touch with them, making them remember you. You're too emotional to let go and move on like a normal person would." Too emotional. The phrase settled over the table like a layer of dust, revealing more about the speaker than the accused. In Stephanie's world, apparently, caring about people beyond their monetary value was a character flaw rather than a professional strength. Kevin Sr. leaned forward, his mediator voice kicking in. "Now let's all take a breath here. Stephanie, Sarah has every right to maintain personal friendships. Sarah, perhaps you could be more mindful of how your connections might affect the current business relationships." Personal friendships. As if 3 years of professional dedication could be reduced to casual social networking. I stood up slowly, my napkin folding itself neatly as I placed it beside my barely touched dessert. "You know what? You're absolutely right, Stephanie. I am too emotional. I'm too emotional to watch people I care about be treated like line items on a spreadsheet. I'm too emotional to pretend that relationships don't matter. And I'm definitely too emotional to sit here and be blamed for your inability to connect with human beings." The silence that followed felt dense enough to swim through. Patricia's face had gone pale. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, and Kevin stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Sarah," Kevin began, but I was already moving toward the hallway, already reaching for my purse. "Thank you for dinner, Patricia. The roast was perfect as always." I walked to my car with measured steps, my heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. Behind me, I could hear raised voices spilling from the house. Kevin Sr.'s attempts at damage control, Robert's defensive protests, Stephanie's continued accusations. But as I settled into the driver's seat and turned the key, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: complete and utter peace. The weight that had been pressing against my chest since that first meeting in Kevin Sr.'s office finally lifted, leaving me feeling strangely light. They weren't my problem anymore. The dysfunction, the blame, the desperate attempts to force square pegs into round holes. None of it belonged to me now. I drove home through the quiet Sunday evening streets, windows down, breathing in the scent of autumn leaves and new possibilities. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt free. The weeks after that disastrous family dinner passed in a blur of autumn colors and unexpected quietude. Kevin and I moved around each other like polite strangers sharing temporary shelter. Our conversations reduced to logistics and weather observations. He worked later, I cooked less, and somehow our house felt both emptier and more peaceful. October melted into November with its familiar rituals. Raking leaves, switching out summer clothes, preparing for the holidays that suddenly felt different without the usual office party planning consuming my evenings. I found myself with time I hadn't possessed in years, hours that stretched luxuriously between sunrise and sunset with no urgent client calls or deadline pressures. It was on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving that the first letter arrived. The envelope bore no return address, just my name written in careful script across cream-colored paper that felt substantial beneath my fingertips. Inside, Mrs. Henderson's familiar handwriting filled 2 pages with words that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I know it might seem strange to write an actual letter in this age of emails and text messages, but some thoughts deserve the permanence of ink and paper. I wanted you to know that what you did for me these past 3 years went far beyond managing my account. When Robert died and I thought I might lose everything we'd built together, you didn't just crunch numbers or restructure contracts. You listened to me cry. You remembered his birthday even after he was gone. You made me feel like his legacy mattered to someone besides me." I had to set the letter down and walk to the kitchen for a glass of water before I could continue reading. "You were never just a manager, dear. You were a guardian of what mattered most, the human connections that make business worth doing. I hope you know how rare and precious that gift is." The letter was signed with a pressed violet, the kind that grew wild in her garden each spring. By Friday, 4 more letters had arrived, each one unique yet carrying the same underlying message. "Thank you for seeing us as more than account numbers." Mr. Williams wrote about the difficult early days of his manufacturing business when I'd stayed late helping him restructure his financing, how I'd celebrated with champagne when he landed his first major contract. "You made success feel shared rather than solitary," his letter said. Mrs. Chen's note came with a photograph that made me laugh out loud, her little terrier wearing the red sweater I'd knitted last Christmas, the one with the tiny paw print pattern I'd designed specifically for him. "Mozart loves his sweater," she wrote. "He wears it every cold morning, and I think of your kindness each time I see him in it." The Morrison family's letter arrived on official business letterhead, but the message was entirely personal. "You held our hand through the hardest year of our lives," it read. "When Dad died and left Mom to figure out a business she'd never really understood, you didn't just explain the legal requirements. You translated grief into manageable tasks, helped her honor his memory while building her own confidence." Mrs. Patterson's note was the shortest but perhaps the most powerful. "You taught me that successful business relationships are really just successful human relationships dressed in professional clothes. Thank you for never making me feel like just another client." Each letter felt like a gift I hadn't known I was waiting to receive. They arrived throughout that Thanksgiving week like autumn leaves drifting down, each one settling into place to create something beautiful and whole. Kevin found me reading them again on Thanksgiving morning, spread across our kitchen table like a collection of treasures. He stood in the doorway holding his coffee mug, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Those from the clients?" he asked. "Former clients," I corrected gently. He sat down across from me, picking up Mrs. Chen's letter with careful fingers. After reading it silently, he set it down and met my eyes. "I had lunch with Mrs. Morrison yesterday." This was news. Kevin rarely had business lunches on his own, preferring to let his father handle the client relationship aspects of the firm. "She asked if you might be interested in doing some consulting work. Nothing official, just helping her navigate some year-end planning decisions. She said Stephanie never really understood her business model." I waited, sensing there was more. "She also mentioned that several other clients have been asking about you, wondering if you were taking on independent projects." "And what did you tell her?" "That I'd ask." He paused, rotating his coffee mug in careful half-turns. "Sarah, would you consider going back to the firm? Dad's been dropping hints about bringing you back in some capacity. Maybe as a senior consultant working with the accounts that need more personal attention." The offer hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Going back would mean returning to a place where I'd been dismissed as easily as outdated office equipment. It would mean pretending that the past month hadn't changed everything about how I viewed my worth and my priorities. "I never left the work, Kevin," I said finally. "Just the building." He frowned, not quite understanding. What do you mean? I mean the work I loved. Caring about people, helping them solve problems, being someone they could trust. That didn't require an office or a title or your father's approval. It just required me being myself. 2 days later, Linda texted with news that shouldn't have surprised me but somehow still did. Stephanie cleaned out her desk yesterday. No drama, no announcement. Just an email about pursuing new opportunities. She looked relieved, honestly. I felt no satisfaction at the news. Only a quiet sadness for a young woman who'd been set up to fail in a role that required years of patience and genuine caring to master. That afternoon my phone rang. Mrs. Morrison's voice was warm and slightly hesitant. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I know you're not with the firm anymore, but I wondered if you might have time for lunch next week? Just to catch up, nothing business related. I'd love that, Mrs. Morrison. Wonderful. And Sarah? Bring that red leather folder of yours. I have some friends who might be interested in meeting you. After hanging up, I sat in my garden despite the November chill, watching the last stubborn leaves cling to the oak tree's branches. Somewhere in the distance I could hear children laughing, dogs barking, life continuing its eternal rhythm of endings and beginnings. My revenge hadn't been loud or dramatic. It hadn't involved shouting matches or public confrontations. Instead, it had been built from cookies and handwritten notes, from remembered birthdays and genuine concern, from the simple act of treating people like human beings rather than revenue streams. And as I watched those final leaves release their hold and spiral gracefully toward the earth, I realized that sometimes the most profound victories are the quietest ones, the kind that grow slowly in the soil of authentic relationships and bloom when you're not even watching. It was more than enough. It was everything. If this story of quiet revenge had you rooting for Sarah, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the client sent those heartfelt letters, showing that genuine connections can't be replaced. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.